Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back to my channel, Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer, with you guys. And today's audio presentation is going to be on Mercury going stationary retrograde on the 31st of October. So that's in less than a week's time, more or less. Okay, so a few things to consider and to think about when you are assessing Mercury retrograde via transit. One thing to pay attention to is those of you that have Mercury retrograde in your natal birth chart. I happen to be one of those people. Usually, for those of you that have a Mercury natal retrograde, the process of Mercury going retrograde a few times per year is an easier process to a degree than those that don't have a natal Mercury retrograde. And the simple reason behind that is because a retrograde planet is very simply the vibration of that energy is turned within, pure and simple. Its normal outward function is just turned inward. So those who have natal Mercury retrograde pretty much function like that their whole life. That's just what they know, because you were born with Mercury being retrograde natally. And in fact, the more challenging thing for those who have a natal Mercury retrograde would be to absorb the information and data that is reflected in the world, which starts off obviously in the family home and then in the school and so on and so forth. And when you have a natal Mercury retrograde, it's actually quite challenging to be receptive to all this information and data, because essentially you're not interested in it. But you don't understand that when you're young. You don't know that, so it can leave young people feeling that they're not as how can I put it? They are not as successful academically, let's say, from the point of view of mainstream consensus reality, where the study at school requires a particular sort of focus and so forth. And you have a young person, being at school, being in these classes, for instance, and just so not interested in the subject, in the learning, because it's not what that soul is here to be learning about. A Mercury retrograde is a soul that's going through a journey where there's extreme internal analysis and processes of things being worked through on that deeper soul level for their evolution. So that's an important point, because if you do have Mercury retrograde in your natal chart, you will relate to this. And when Mercury does go retrograde 3-4 times a year, that can be a process where you probably feel an even stronger connection, actually, when it comes to the experience of what's actually happening when Mercury is retrograde. Because whether we like it or not, whether we try to resist it or whatever the case, Mercury retrograde does interfere with the world of communication, technology, and so forth, which is why it is very obvious, those of you who have been observing or listening to, astrology or reading astrology books for some time, even in very basic sort of popular um, astrology discuss the matter of Mercury retrograde and you know the what sort of shows up as a result of that. And it's important, but it's at the superficial level from that popular astrological level. But when you start to look at things um, from a deeper level in terms of understanding the retrograde process with every single planet for that matter, but in today's presentation we're focusing on Mercury, and Mercury is in Scorpio, as is the Sun, as is Venus. So we have quite a bit of Scorpio energy going on. Pallas Athena's in Scorpio. Now, as you can see, the chart that I've got on the screen is actually for the 31st of October. So that's where everything will be on that particular day. And what you can see here is that Mercury is stationary. Okay, so it doesn't actually go retrograde for a couple of days. I'll just show you so that you can see this for yourself. This, if I take it back a day, you can see that there's no letter in line with Mercury, meaning Mercury is just moving in his normal direct motion. He's in his shadow period, though, by the way, which the pre-shadow period started on the 11th of October. And that shadow period will really run through till about the 7th of December. So that's just a very important zone of what's happening with Mercury in his retrograde and direct movement as well. So if we step this forward by a day, you can see that Mercury now has an S in line with it. That means Mercury is stationary, meaning it's stopped. When a planet stops, it's a very, very important vibration that emanates from that space, meaning from that archetype and that zodiacal degree, which is 27 degrees of Scorpio. So I'll just step it forward again. Step it forward again. You can see Mercury is still stationary, except it's changed color now. The reason it's changed color is because if we click one more day forward, then you can see Mercury has actually gone direct. So let me just take it back to here, which is when Mercury begins the stationary process before he turns retrograde. The thing to observe is in this particular chart, we can see that Mercury and Venus are exactly conjunct in the sign of Scorpio on the same degree. Now, that's a very important message as far as I'm concerned. And before I talk a little bit about that, the other thing that I want to mention as well is, as I stated at the beginning, if you have a natal Mercury retrograde, then the retrograde periods, and this one that we're about to go into, is a familiar territory, is another way of putting it. So for those that don't have Mercury retrograde natally, the function of turning within and reflecting and processing things internally and evaluating things internally and slowing down is not as easy. It doesn't come as naturally because a Mercury in its direct movement when you're born, it's the function of your left brain. So its mode of operation is the mode of operation of just expressing and moving outward. Whereas a Mercury retrograde is actually introspective. And that's a very important thing to understand, because those of you who don't have Mercury retrograde natally, you are likely to find these Mercury retrograde periods more challenging, because you are, whether you like it or not, you are forced to slow down and go back and revisit and reflect and analyze. A Mercury retrograde is similar to the vibration of Jupiter, that is, right brain leading to the left brain. Jupiter ruling Sagittarius, which is Sagittarius correlates to our right brain, and Gemini correlates to our left brain. So the normal, actually, let me just reframe that. I don't like to use the word normal, but now I'm stuck for words. The rulership of Mercury to the Gemini archetype is, well, it's the first air sign anyway. So it's the point in consciousness where the dots start to connect from that mental level, which is why it's information, 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 and overload of information. And Mercury ruling Virgo then takes the experience and process of the mental function into those deeper layers, where it starts to analyze things in very complex ways, actually, extremely complex. But the Sagittarius, which is in traditional astrology, is, Mercury in Sag is in his detriment because it's the opposite sign to Gemini. But the Sagittarius archetype is the one that correlates to right brain intuition. So when Mercury goes retrograde, in other words, we are going into those deeper structures and deeper layers that actually take us to our soul, really. So the Mercury retrograde period for each of us on a evolutionary level, we'd say soul level, the only thing that the soul is wanting to experience during this retrograde period is to retrieve, receive, delve into, understand, transform information, data that pertains to its evolution. That's the only thing that the soul is interested in when Mercury is retrograde. And having Mercury in the sign of Scorpio going retrograde, then you can imagine that what I just said holds even greater power and weight, because the Scorpion archetype is the archetype that correlates to the soul. So when we have Mercury, regardless of where our Mercury is natally, what sign it's in, the Scorpio archetype correlates to the soul. So Mercury in Scorpio going retrograde is taking us into these deeper soul structures where we can access and retrieve and revisit and remember very specific data, information that our soul is ready to hear, to understand, to connect to. So this is what Mercury going retrograde in the sign of Scorpio is going to take us through over the next few weeks. Mercury turns stationary direct on the 20th of November. So the retrograde period is only about 3 weeks, thereabouts. So it's that they're short little periods, but they are very important, because there's a lot that can show up during these retrograde periods, depending on our life story, who we are, what age we are, where we're at in our life, so on and so forth. Those very personal details are obviously going to be very different for every single one of us. No question about that. So my presentation is to bring to your attention, first of all, where is 27 degrees of Scorpio in your own birth chart? That is where Mercury will be located on this date, on the 31st of October. And this is the day that Mercury is stationary, retrograde. Right next to Mercury is Venus in the sign of Scorpio, same degree. That suggests to me that whatever we are going back into, the process of withdrawing to a degree, introversion, introspection, is the experience for the few weeks that Mercury is retrograde. And because Venus is right there, there must be something that is going to reveal itself regarding relationships, right? The obvious. So Pluto is the body that connects to people that either can disappear out of your life or reappear. And that can be for a billion different reasons. The reasons are not the point. The point is that this is an experience and process of Pluto. And Pluto is the ruler of Scorpio, right? So this Mercury in Scorpio holds that that archetype, that energy, that vibration of Plutonian type of experiences. And here we have Venus at the same degree where Mercury is about to go he is stationary, it's about to go retrograde. So there's going to be a process, I think, for a lot of you that's going to require brutality of truth, investigation, looking into things with absolute depth, courage, and truth. And it's not an easy thing to do because you have to be really honest with what's there, what you can see. Scorpio is as I've said before in previous videos, it's the X-ray vision. Our eyes are turned inward when Mercury is retrograde. Scorpio has X-ray vision. It's the eagle eye that zooms in. I don't know if you know much about eagles, but I don't know if this is the case with all of them, but I know there are very specific eagles that their vision is extraordinary in terms of how far they can see in great depth. Just their physical eyes, the way they're made. And the eagle is an animal that correlates to the archetype of Scorpio as well. So Mercury going retrograde in Scorpio, it's really about facing who we are and facing who we are not and who we cannot actually be. Which is why I said it's about being really honest. It's very confronting. A lot of people will resist it. I can understand that, no judgment. It's not an easy thing to do. If the soul's not ready, it won't. But the thing is, when this Mercury goes retrograde in Scorpio, it is an opportunity for every single soul to undergo this type of process and experience, provided the individual / soul is open, receptive, willing, and able to go through this process. The Scorpio archetype correlating to the soul, clearly the inward processing that's going to go on, the messages that can be received, they couldn't really be explained, just through language, like I'm speaking to you right now. Words cannot capture the depths of your soul and its evolutionary journey. And what that looks like and what that is for every single one of you is completely unique. But what I do know for certain is that the depths of your soul's journey cannot be encapsulated through words or language. And this is where the water signs take us into those spheres. The water signs take us into the world of the soul. Water is like the language of the soul. So we don't really need language a lot of the time when it comes to these deeper soul experiences. It's the language or the words is not the experience or what creates the experience. The language is just a very helpful tool to enable us to articulate and point to certain things and share a narrative and an experience and so forth. But it can never truly encapsulate the depths of what each soul encounters or experiences as it goes through these very, very deep processes. And this is what Mercury retrograde is looking to do. This is on the soul level entry. Now, if you were looking at Mercury retrograde on that basic external level, which is important because it can really screw things up, people can be experience receiving incorrect information. There's a lot of misunderstandings that go on. There's delays, there's setbacks, appointments, phone calls, internet, information, data, that all goes to shit. We know that. Not absolutely everything for absolutely everybody through the whole cycle of Mercury retrograde, but everybody experiences some version of that. Just depends who you are, what you're interacting with, what's going on in your life. How much are you using, computers, phones? There's all these little details factor into how one experiences Mercury retrograde on that external material plane. That's just the reflection of um, what needs to be happening on a deeper plane. What we need to be paying attention to is not the busyness of what our normal everyday kind of life perhaps looks like. So the asking and the opportunity is there being offered for each of us to find a way to actually take a step back and to slow down. And I know there are lots of people on the planet that would say, well, I can't slow down. I have a schedule that's, extremely demanding and that's like jam packed. And I can tell you right now, I have one of those too. We all do, regardless of who we are or what we're doing. And that schedule is going to be interrupted. So for those of you that have come to me for readings of late, and I have a few of you on my list, and I thank you all for coming to me and sending you all so much love and blessings, and those of you who haven't as well, of course. But yeah, just please be patient because there might be little hiccups here and there. That's just more or less a given. So, I mean, that's the external, everyday kind of level of that. We know that. I don't need to go on about that. It's just something that's a given. We know, we sort of expect it. But sometimes we can take it for granted and we can forget, Mercury is retrograde. So maybe hold back from making long-term decisions on things. It's not really the best time to be making long-term decisions, I don't think. Certainly other factors, would contribute to that in a way that could make that even more difficult or perhaps make that easier. It just depends on the transits in your own chart and other things as well, of course. But it also depends on This Mercury going stationary retrograde at 27 degrees on the 31st of October, what aspects does it have to planets in your chart? So first point is, where is it going to be retrograde? Which part of the chart, which house? That correlates to the area of life that's going to be connected to this process of what I discussed before about going within, about receiving messages, data, information from your soul. It's like soul codes coming through and having the ability to activate these at this time. They're like little soul gifts. So it's a very special time actually when Mercury goes retrograde into Scorpio. From um, a higher um, a higher experience. If because let's be truthful, there is the darker shades and darker side to Scorpio, and when Scorpio is operating from those darker levels because it's very unconscious or because the energy has been suppressed. When energy gets suppressed, and we're talking about sexual energy as well here, um, when it gets suppressed, it comes out in really screwed up ways, which is why we see, just the darker shades of life, sexual abuse and so on and so forth. That's sexual energy that's just been repressed, basically, and comes out in these extremely distorted ways. So, yeah, Scorpio has the potential to manifest in those dark ways 100%. So it depends, again, who you are and so on and so forth. Now, if Mercury is forming hard aspects to planets in your natal birth chart, the transiting Mercury going stationary retrograde I'm referring to, then pay attention to that, because whatever planet it is, that's going to be very, very important for the cycle of Mercury being retrograde. It's that those planets that are being aspected by Mercury are going to shape and describe what's going to be involved in this retrograde cycle for you. So if it's the sun, just to give you an example, if it's the sun, it could have to do with relationships, father figures, men in general, and something about your own personal conscious goals as well, and what you're trying to actualize, self-actualize, express in your life. If it's the moon, it's going to be related to women, mother, and your emotional body and inner, deeper dimensions and structures. So, I'm just giving you some really basic sort of examples, but whatever the planets are that are aspected by Mercury in hard aspect are going to be very important for that retrograde period. They are going to add to the experience of the information that can be retrieved, accessed from that soul level while Mercury is retrograde. If there are soft aspects, oh, by the way, if they are hard aspects, then clearly we know hard aspects, which is the conjunction, opposition, and square, in terms of traditional aspects. We know that hard aspects they are hard because they create crisis. They create cataclysmic events. They create tension. They create conflict. You can't bypass it. It's just what comes through the vibration of those particular aspects. It doesn't mean that nothing positive comes out of that. That's ridiculous. Incredibly powerful and positive experiences can emerge through those aspects, but it doesn't come easily. You have to go through some tensions before you get to the good stuff, as it were. Now, if Mercury makes some soft aspects, such as trines and sextiles, to planets in your birth chart while he goes retrograde, then that's going to clearly add some kind of ease with in relation to those planets and that process of what's happening over that 3 week period where Mercury is retrograde. And those planets will also be correlating to what Mercury is trying to understand and access and activate from that soul level. The data and information that's trying to come through will speak into these planets that Mercury is aspecting. So those are some of the other points that I wanted to mention. Just checking to see if I've covered what I wanted to cover. And I think I did mention this before, that the degree that Mercury goes retrograde in is very important, and it actually will be 27 degrees. So just take note of 27 degrees in your birth chart and see where that is in your birth chart, because that's a quite a sensitive zone, sensitive point. Okay, just see if there was anything else I wanted to share here. So that's the essentially what I wanted to share with you guys today. And also the other thing that I wanted to say was that was it when Mercury is stationary direct? Yes. So I think this is very interesting. I just want to show you the chart for when Mercury is finished from his retrograde period, right? And he's about to go stationary direct. So you can see here that Mercury has gone back to as far back as 21 degrees of Scorpio, still retrograde. Still retrograde there. Hang on a minute. It's the 20th. Yes. I think I said 11th of November earlier in this presentation. I meant to say 20th of November, so my apologies for the mix-up there. Okay, so have a look at Mercury here. You can see Mercury is stationary, ready to go direct. So this is stationary direct, okay, on the 20th of November. So Mercury got back to as far as 11 degrees of Scorpio. And if I just click forward here, you can see Mercury still stationary, and one more day and boom, no S, no R, so Mercury is completely direct. Now look at the degrees of Mercury. It's 11 degrees of Scorpio, and I really love what Mercury does to the chart moving forward, because I mean, when you listen to this now, which is well, it depends when you listen to it, but today is the 25th of October, so you'll have time to process what I've shared and consider it relative to your own birth chart, and consider the points relative to your own birth chart. That is, where does Mercury go retrograde in your birth chart? What does it aspect in your chart, if anything? Where is 27 degrees located in your birth chart? All those points that I made. is your natal Mercury retrograde in your birth chart? If it is, if it isn't, there are different experiences, like I mentioned at the beginning. But once we go through this process, which is going to include relationship matters where some unfinished business gets cleared up for once and for all. And this could pertain to a person that you had a connection with last year. This could pertain to a connection you had with a person this year. Whoever it is, and there has not been proper closure, as it were, this is going to be the period where this is going to happen. That's another dimension that comes into this Mercury retrograde because of that Venus being right next to Mercury just as he's about to go retrograde. So people reappearing or disappearing can be a theme with this Mercury going retrograde as well. But once we go through that whole process and have the experience that we do and come out of that experience and come out of it in our own, through our own unique way, with our own unique soul message or messages that we receive during that time, then as we proceed to move forward, we are moving forward with Mercury being direct, forming a trine to Neptune and a trine to the North Node. So that's a grand water trine. And that's a beautiful theme and aspect pattern to be reflecting how we're going to proceed forward after this pretty intense retrograde period that we are going to embark. So the trine to Neptune, Neptune being spirit and truth, and our correlation, connection, relationship, understanding, integration into the divine source creation to all things. That's Neptune. So Mercury forming a trine there and forming a trine to the North Node in Cancer. This is the transiting node in Cancer. It's been in Cancer for some time, and the nodes always move backwards. So that's why the node is getting ready to eventually come, out of Cancer. It's going to go into Gemini. But in the meantime, we still have it in Cancer. And this North Node in Cancer has been speaking collectively to all of us from that point of getting in touch with our emotional body, feeling our stuff, feeling what we feel as opposed to trying to ignore it, suppress it, block it, or deny it because it's too painful. So we suppress it through substances, all sorts of addictions, sexual addictions, relationship addictions, food addictions, whatever. And that doesn't allow us to evolve. It's not right or wrong. It's just that it doesn't allow us to evolve. It keeps us stagnant because we cannot evolve if we don't experience through the feeling body, which is Cancer. So this trine that Mercury has to the North Node in Cancer is a really inspiring message moving forward for all of us, where there's a beautiful energy being set up in this water grand trine with Scorpio, Pisces, and Cancer, that it is enabling us to integrate and assimilate in our feeling body, Cancer, the emotional body. It's where feelings are really, really, I would say, extremely vulnerable, raw, and extremely insecure, which is why we try and hide that, or we don't want to go there. We don't want to show that to anybody. But this grand trine is suggesting that the process of what we've just been through with Mercury retrograde and what we've been able to see with greater depth and clarity. And what we've been able to receive and understand from our soul for our evolutionary path moving forward is going to be beautifully assimilated and integrated through the support of North Node, emotional body, Neptune, spiritual body, you could say, and beyond all of that, the divine source creation to all things, spirit. So that's a beautiful way to leave perhaps this presentation as well. It's a very inspiring message moving forward, and of course the key with anything really is about the awareness and consciousness that we can bring into every situation that we are facing. That's always the key component in terms of how much we can understand, what is actually taking place, where there can be less resistance and less fear. Pardon me. Doesn't mean it's easier necessarily, but it does mean that when you bring awareness into matters, that actually translates then into seeing the meaning. When life has meaning for all the different components of your life and all the different experiences, when there can be meaning connected to that experience and that process, I feel that creates the experience of non-resistance. It's probably the best way I can put it. Okay, guys, I hope that what I've shared with you today connects to you in some kind of way. I hope it sheds some light for you over that period of when Mercury does go retrograde. If you have any questions or comments, as always, please leave them below the video. Thank you so much for tuning in and for connecting, and for connecting with the community section as well, for subscribing. If you're new to my channel, thank you for taking the time to listen, and I look forward to checking with you guys very soon with something else. Sending you all much love and blessings, and bye for now. Thanks.